You stream and I start the recording.
Please go ahead, Lauren.
Yes, streaming started.
Thank
I
you.
start the recording.
Hmm.
The notification. Yeah, episode 4 now.
Anyone else connected to YouTube Live apart from myself?
I got the notification. I haven't opened it.
Okay.
I'm connecting to it.
Just mute yourself once we go live, huh? You're
Yeah.
using the second invite. Just confirm the video. That's enough.
I'm just trying to see how many viewers.
Mhm.
Because it just says one viewer at the moment, which should be myself.
I think that we can help you out a little more detail. Back.
Okay, good. 3 watching now.
I'm in already.
Awesome.
So 3 watching. Yeah, 3 watching, correct.
3 viewers. Okay, 3 minutes and counting. Two minutes and counting. Mhm. You can get ready, Amar.
Yep. Thanks, Noel. I'm ready.
Get ready to raise your voice.
Yeah.
Awesome. You should be able to start soon.
Yep.
Go.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Welcome to this Tech Talks Asia. So today we are covering up, majorly focusing on hybrid integration with Azure Stack HCI and the on-premises infrastructure. We have a bonus session which is upcoming, which will be more excited, yeah, which is basically on May 22nd, and it will be focusing on security overall from the Microsoft Azure Stack HCI. Today's session, we just don't want to inspire you. We wanted to ignite the interesting thoughts, and it can be helpful for you to take off your conversations with your end customers. Okay. So with me today, I have my team, the core team we call, right? So Noel, Ko, myself, Vic, and Lauren. We are the five of a team who is running today's live session. That's where we call ourselves as showrunners. Okay. So today's session is majorly brought to us by Intel and Microsoft together. So today's session entirely next 60 minutes is broken into two ways. Okay, first thing is what actually the best disaster readiness can be utilized from the Azure perspective, from our HCI perspective on the on-premises infrastructure. Yes, obviously taking the benefit of a Windows Admin Center, which starts with Azure Files, Azure Backup, and Site Recovery. The second set of a thing is basically on a management easy from Azure, which is Azure Arc, which is not very new to all of us, obviously, right? Yeah, so let me just directly jump on to the first initial topic, yeah, because we know how the file servers have been in our infrastructures very much helpful for our day-to-day requirements, right? So how it is easy for us and on-premises file servers can be moved to or taken the benefit of Azure files from the Azure perspective. That is basically the walkthrough which I would be going through. Okay, the technology behind the Azure file and the file sync are the two triggering services which runs on the back end of Azure files. Okay, I'm just taking a simple scenario today that we know we have a lot of legacy services. Most of our customers have a lot of legacy servers, right? Example like 2008 or 2008 R2 servers, and the extended support even for the 2008 and R2 servers also completed by January 2023. And soon we may be expecting the end of support even for Server 2012, right? In this case, how do we actually take the benefit of built-in capabilities like storage migration service, okay, which can help us from moving from the older servers, the legacy servers, to the latest versions like 2022. Not just pausing ourselves within the server to server, how can we actually take the privilege of taking the benefit of Azure File and Azure File Sync to move our data or the files or the folders to use it for a different location. So just in the case of an example, I'm thinking of a scenario that I have an existing main office location and I have a second office location, which is a remote office branch office, basically, which is located somewhere in a different location. How simplifiedly I can manage all my file servers or file services using Azure File Sync. This is the total scenario which I would be looking after for the course of a demo. Okay, and by taking a simple example, the demo is totally designed in a simple manner, thinking of two different locations. So, for example, my primary server is located in Malaysia. Okay, for example, and I wanted to make sure the disaster recovery of my file server into a different country, which is like a Singapore, right? That is where the basic flexibility comes in when we are utilizing Azure File, right? It actually helps you to connect with the multiple sites, okay? And when I look at this, does it stops to me just within one or two other countries? No. Being it's a hybrid, being it's a cloud native Azure File Sync, I can use this file server setup to have a sync between multiple locations. So for example, here in the demo, you can see it is showing basically how you can able to synchronize all your file servers between different locations, right? This is the total flow which I would be covering upon today. So to make it a simple, this is a demo recording which we did. One of my colleagues who has created this demo recording. It is basically in our infrastructure. The second one, the left side one, what was the basically Malaysia side, and the right side one is the Singapore file. So what we are trying to do here is I'm just trying to create on a file folder on the Malaysia location, which is the left. Then I just create a folder called Malaysia-audit, which is really a Malaysia-audit. Okay. This is the folder which I would like to see how the sync works on the second side, which is on the Singapore location. Okay. On the right side, this is the location which you see. This is basically located in Singapore. Within a few seconds, we should able to see the replication between Malaysia and Singapore. Okay, you see now there is a folder called my audit. Okay, I'm just trying to create more folders so that on the live you can able to experience well, right? So I have created one more folder which is on the Malaysia side, which is called logistic. Okay, and here I just don't want to create a folder. I created even some files within the folder. So to just make sure that how the sync works, right? This is how it can be properly showcased. So for example, when we come back to our Singapore site on the right side, right, when after few seconds you can able to see the folder sync. Yeah, it is obviously differentiated based on the folder size and folder location, right? As of now, for the demo sake, we just created a simple file, and that is where you can able to see immediately that based on the size of the folder, it differentiate the sizes. So now, for example, we did from one side, right? Basically from east to west, example, right? Like when I'm trying to do the same thing from west to east. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to create a multiple folders from the Singapore side. Okay. Now you see Singapore HR, SG-HR is the folder which I created, right? And I'm trying to create a few more folders, which is Singapore-retail. I believe it is retail, which I have created. Yes. So what I wanted to do is it's basically a multi-site automatic data synchronization, right? So it actually helps a two-way data copy by taking the benefit of Azure hybrid Azure File Sync or Azure Files, what I can say. Okay. When you just click on this folder and just create multiple files, automatically on the left side, you can able to refer already the Singapore HR folder is created, right? This is how the seamless the Azure File Sync works. Okay. Now let me just take a look and give you a little more perspective how the configuration actually has to be made of. Okay. The first one, I'm using a Azure portal, where on Azure portal, I went to a storage account and I'm just checking where the setting up of all Azure File Sync on Azure Cloud. This is how where the steps are followed up. Okay. And the second thing is from the on-premises, when we are setting up, we use our admin center, Windows Admin Center as a front-ending tool to set up a file sync on host via admin center as a browser tool so that it helps us. So when we are setting up it, automatically it prepares the resource group where we want to utilize the services and connect to the storage, and it will set up the storage service, and it helps us to download the agent from where we can able to actually take the files back or restore, right? This is the steps which actually happens on your on premises. And once we did the setup, we can go back and cross check even on Azure portal how where the settings of endpoints have been properly active, or you can able to cross check, right? So this is the screenshot where you can able to refer how this multiple sites are being synced in one location, which is basically in Azure terminology, it is called as an endpoint. Okay. And this is the simple screenshot where you see a multiple folders, right? Now, basically, everyone gets a simple question, right? Yeah, we are able to see this live demo, but where is it reposited? How easily it can be connected, or how easily we can able to access even if we are not in the site, right? That is where this subject comes in, which is basically on your Azure portal. When you go to your file share, you can see all the folders, which is basically a repository, which can be syncing between multiple sites. So Azure Files actually can be extended as a disaster recovery, and it can be helpful for your multiple sites activities to access, right? So this is how a simple Azure File Sync is, okay? So with this, we covered obviously Azure Files, which has been a very native and easy kind of for a file sharing. Now the basic question comes in is, yes, in the major scenarios when the disaster situation happens, right? How do we utilize Azure for making up the backup, right? So that's where the next demo I would be following up. Okay, so the Azure demo, Azure Backup is basically a service which helps you to simplify and secure all your business continuity data as a disaster recovery, right? So in that scenario, how actually it helps, right? It actually makes sure that it manages the centralized way for managing your backup, okay? And it encrypts and it helps you for managing your threat protection with the ransomware or accidental detections or disasters, or ensuring that the data when it is transferring having an encryption. And it actually helps us even to enable a multi-factor authentication, and it does not just pauses us the files and folders. Okay, it even supports the system slates, virtual machines, or the databases, all the files, whatever you have in your on-premises, to have an option for a backup. Okay, let's see a little bit more detailed one on the demo. So this is a demo recording which we have done. Okay, so to simplify it, what I'm choosing is I'm choosing one simple virtual machine. Okay, the first step is I'm using a Windows Admin Center. Okay, and I'm accessing one virtual machine called as a DC, which is in my case a data center edition. So when I see on the left side, I have already an option from the admin center to directly integrate my Azure backup. When I do set up Azure backup, right, already my admin center is registered with my credentials of Azure. Okay, this is the first step generally we do. And how do we set up the Azure backup? So when we expand the Azure backup, the second step, right, it will prompt us to double check all the defaults. One is a subscription, whatever the subscription we are using. Second is we need to be very clear on which vault where we need to connect this backup. Basically, the resource group vault which we are connecting. The third one is automatically populated because it's a resource group connected. And the location is very important, the primary, which subscription and which region you are taking. So because the backup is something which we can able to access at any point of time, right? And accordingly, we need to choose our subscription based location. For the sake of demo, I'm choosing the D drive, whole D drive of my data center server. I'm using this for making a backup. Okay, and I have a flexibility, as I said, right? So I have an option to take the retainment of my schedule. So for example, how many weeks or how many retains I can able to take, right? And the last important thing is the encryption passphrase. Okay, this is minimum recommended of a 16 characters for creating a password. Okay, this ensures our data is more secured and it is encrypted. Okay, so the recommendation is the 16 characters minimum. So for the sake of demo, what I'm using is Azure Backface. Okay, now let me just forward a little bit. Okay, so once we are done here, just next option is just to apply. Okay, once we apply, what happens is the Azure backup actually tries to connect with Azure, and first it authenticates with the certificate saying that this is the subscription, this is the recovery vault, and this is my server, and this is my folder which I want to do. Okay, and automatically on the back end, when we are running this step, a backup agent will be set up. So as I earlier said, that's a very simple step. When we are doing the next steps, automatically the backup agent, the recovery service, everything will be set up automatically on the back end. Okay, this is the first step after we apply it. And once we done, it actually showcase you the status that registration of a backup agent is also happening, right? It is just not downloading, it is basically authenticating with the certificate in the initial what we have taken, which helps us to register our backup agents. Once the backup agent is done, this is how the view looks on admin center, the Azure backup. Okay, so overall it's like a overall view which you can able to see of Azure backup, right? So you can see the jobs, you can see the recovery points, you can just see the protected items. Okay, for example, if I want to do a backup right now, for example, I just, as of now, what I did is I just selected the folder or the drive which I wanted, and it takes generally a few seconds. Once everything is done, every setup is done, you can able to see the notification then that your Azure backup setup is fully completed, right? So after a few seconds, when I click on my backup now, which is the protected items on the below, which is a drive, right? So it automatically showcases that the policy has been set. So it generally takes minimum of a few minutes, I can say, based on the folder and the settings what we have taken, right? So, and the other perspective on this page you can able to see is the recovery points, the jobs. Okay, the recovery points actually helps us to see the tracking of multiple requests what we have done, if it is a backup or recovery, all the things you can able to see from the recovery point. Okay, once the setup is done, when I click on backup now, this is where the option comes in, what do you want to backup? So as I said, it's a files which is on a D drive. I have chosen that and I just selected it. Now, automatically, Admin Center plays your role as an acting agent, which actually synchronizes with Azure and ensures all the backup steps are properly taken care of. Okay. So once that is done, after a few minutes, you can able to see the status on your overview that the job as of now, which is running, is still in progress. One job is running on the Azure backup, right? This is the first simple step what we can able to see. So once the job is done, right, we go back and cross check even on the top overview, the job section, it is saying that job is post backup steps, right? So now once the notification we receive, backup has completely successful, running a backup, this is the notification on the right side top, you can able to see the bell icon, right? So once I just cross check and refresh, I can see that the validation and the protection status is already done, right? And now when I go back to jobs, I can see the status also, which is job completed, right? And as I said earlier, when we are doing a recovery points, you can able to just go to recovery points and check, right? Now, if I want to recover from different location, take an example. If I want to recover the data from recover to my server back. So what is the best step to follow, right? So best step to follow is whichever the server we have used for the data backup, right? Where you have already an agent installed. You remember when the step was happening, you could able to see the agent was installing on the backend, right? So that is basically called as a Microsoft Azure Backup Agent. Okay, this is a tool which you can able to communicate to Azure and you can recover this. Okay, for the sake of demo, I just trying to recover the drive which I have selected earlier. So when I click on recover data, this is showing which server it is. And what I wanted to recover is individual files and folders. Okay, now what is the volume which I wanted to? Because for example, in the real-time scenario, we may have two different drives also kept in Azure backup. In that case, we have a flexibility to choose the volume. And the recovery point, whatever the latest here. As of now, if you just cross-check here, this point is basically 8:53 p.m. and even the last backup was done is the 8:53 p.m. This is where the real time you can able to see the recovery point what we have, right? So when we try to recover it, basically that folder comes as a mount data like ISO image, right? Sorry, right, like an ISO image. When I click on mount, it automatically creates a temporary drive on my Windows Explorer, on my Server Explorer. Okay. Yes, it takes maximum of a few minutes to just mount your drive, whatever you want to recover with. Okay. This is how the steps we can follow for recovering. Okay. Let me just browse a little bit speeder so that once I click on a browse, once the mounting is done, okay, you can, it even recommends you to use certain tools for like a robocopy or certain tools when you want to make sure the sync is proper, not to have miss of any files, right? So this is the folder which I have done a backup from the D drive, and I can able to retrieve this directly in my PC. Okay, so once my drive is open, I can just click my recovery is done. I can just make it as a unmount. So for time being, what I will do is I will just try to copy the folder to my local server. Okay, what I'm doing is the temporary folder which you see, the CB, I'm just moving that folder as a recovery. I'm just making a folder in my local server and calling it as a restore. And I'm just pasting it to my local server. That's it. It's a very simple, like a copy paste option, I can say, right? That simple it is when we are using this Azure backup. Okay, these are the two folders, which is the HR and finance, and you see multiple files in it, right? So what I'm just doing is I'm just copying the specific files which I wanted to have a restore, and I'm just pasting it to my local drive. You see, that is how the simplified the recovery option happens is, right? So once I am done with my job, whatever the recovery is files when I want to look at, right, then I just need to click on unmount. So once I do an unmount, it automatically disconnects the recovery agent from the Azure. Okay. Now there generally a question comes to all of us, right? Yeah, so yeah, it is very good. We know what is happening, but if we want to just see how from the Azure perspective, right? So basically we go to recovery service vault on the left side, you can able to see here, and you have an options on the left side called protected items. Okay, so you see now the agent, whatever has been detected is Azure backup agent. As of now, multiple times what it has actually accessed is 3. Okay, this is how where we can able to access from Microsoft Azure. Okay, so when I click on my Azure backup agent, I can see the drive, which is my server dc-dc.lab.net, which you see here, right? This is what it's synced up. And when I click on more details, I can see when was the first setup and the latest used and how many counts and other stuff. This is very simple how you can able to access the backup items even from Azure perspective. Okay. So when I come back here, I just wanted to see more details example, right? So when I come back to admin center, I see I want to double check the jobs. Okay, you see it is the recovery is one job and the backup was one job which has been created here. Correct. That's a simple way how we can able to ensure or easily seamlessly integrate Azure backup. Okay. Now I want to just see one more time the backup because I changed some setup or some files on the specific folder example, right? In that case, how do I do? So this is a simple step again, as we did the backup now. This is a second action and automatically you can able to see the overview has changed to 3 jobs, okay? And 2 is successfully completed, 1 is in progress, right? So the data transfer completed, all backed up data is verifying, right? This is how the recovery of a backup which is automatically synchronizing. It is a manual method what I'm doing it, which is backup now. But generally, as I scheduled it, we can able to set up the timelines and the policies which automatically make sure happens based on the time or the slot we have been selected. Okay, now you see the recovery point is 2 here, right? Earlier which was 8:53 p.m. Now we have one more recovery point which is 9 because I did manually one more backup for the sake of a demo so that everyone can actually easily understand that how simplified it is, right? Now when I try to recover the data, I should able to see 2 recovery points. This is the way how it is differentiated. Okay, so when I just click on my D drive, okay, and you can able to see now 2 recovery points. This is how the simple Azure backup works. Okay, so this is the simple steps how we use. So the same steps again to follow. Just mount ourselves and go back to the folder or a file which we want to recover, and we just run it up, right? And if we want to modify the setup even from the backup agent tool as well, we have an option for changing the schedule or modifying it and managing multiple paths or the timelines and the frequency. Okay, this is how the simple Azure backup is. Okay, and we have an option even to choose that when and on which day we want to have and which time we want to have the backup to be running and how much frequency we can able to do. Is it a weekly or daily or the specific days how we can able to see, right? This is also a method where we can able to configure the scheduled backup which can be in more of a real-time requirements in most of infrastructures when we use it, right? This is how simple it is when we are trying to keep our files and folders as a backup on cloud. So the first one, what we thought was Azure Files, which is file service, how we can able to share and use it with multiple locations. Second is the disaster recovery benefit. One is basically from Azure backup perspective, right? This is how a simple method, even by using a Azure backup agent, we can able to set up. Okay. This is the second demo which I have finished. This is the second disaster recovery service, which is part of Azure, which can be easily integrated with our infrastructure as a hyperconverged, right? And the third scenario, which I would I would prefer more interesting, is the recovery, because basically we require a recovery, which is a business continuity demand in most of our real-time situation, like for business ops or workloads, what we use across, right? So it actually helps us. Azure Site Recovery helps majorly for having a non-disruptive scenarios from having a failovers, right? So in this case, what I'm trying to do is I'm using my admin center. I'm trying to use Azure Site Recovery on my cluster. When you see here on admin center on the above, you see this is a cluster manager, right? So I'm using a cluster where I have multiple servers of inventory. Okay, so I'm using this as a step, and I'm trying to set up a site recovery agent from my virtual machines. Okay, so when I go to virtual machine, this is where the automatically it pops up for Azure Site Recovery. The first step, what we need to use for configuring the site recovery to our cluster is selecting a right subscription and is selecting for the right resource group. Okay, in this case, I'm just using a resource group which has already set up for the demo purpose, which is co-R&D. Basically, when we are doing all this kind of scenarios in our own environment, we try to make sure a simplified name. This is a resource group, and I need to use my resource service vault, which has been already created. This is a prerequisite. Okay, when I just do a setup, automatically admin center plays a roles on the backend, and it ensures to set up our recovery agent and the site recovery setup. Okay. To simplify this, I'll just forward a little bit in speeder. This is the different steps when the backend policies happens. Okay. Once you are done with this is how the status changes, and it will take few minutes. Obviously, it is just not a file; it's a full virtual machines which is running, which is having a site recovery setup on Azure, right? So after this, it is very simple. How do we access it, right? So once the site recovery is active on your cluster manager, when you go to virtual machine and when you go to your inventory, when you click on your manage, there is an option for replicating using Azure Site Recovery. This is where you enable the site recovery. Okay, this is the first step when you do, right? And the second step when you click on that is it double checks all the subscription information, and it will ask you what all the steps you need to follow, basically like a subscription and the location and the storage account where the site recovery has to go and hold that entire selection, right? So this is the page where you need to have a specific settings to be properly used, and just click protect VM. This is the first step. Okay, once the protect VM happens, automatically the virtual machine replication starts from on-premises cluster to Azure. This is the place where you can able to see the status. So if you see here, this is basically called as a disaster recovery. This is the status on your admin center itself, and it is showcasing it is replicating. Okay, and how do I cross check, right? When you see this is basically with underline means this is something which is option to enable or browse to your Azure portal as well. When I click on that link on the replication, I can go and check the status of it. The replication setup is healthy, and the status of the virtual machine recovery is still on 0% synchronized. When the replication is happening, this is how the status looks like. Okay. After that, after a few minutes, when the setup and the security is properly enabled as a disaster recovery, the status on the admin center changes as a protected. So protected means it's basically replicated a virtual machine on or the site recovery on Azure. That is what the meaning of a protection. Okay. So one more step which we can do, obviously, because when we are looking at a site recovery, which is a replication solution, how do I actually ensure that the setup is properly done? That's the first important question any IT admin prefers to have, right? So what we should do is we can go back to Azure portal, okay, and we can go back to Azure portal and just click on this called test failover. So when I do a test failover, I can able to see the primary mission is paused, and I can able to access this server into a different location. Okay. So when I click on a test failover, right, it automatically prompts me certain informations. Basically, how do I access my cloud virtual machine, which is a site recovery location, right? Basically, I use an IP address, which is a public facing IP address. Okay. And majority lot of questions comes to us saying that, oh, does it change the IP address of your primary virtual machine? No, right? So this is basically a public IP address which is available on your Azure portal to access from anywhere of your virtual machine. Okay, so there is a separate IP address which is basically on your server, on your infrastructure, on your network which you have considered, right? This is how you can able to see two different IP addresses. Okay, from anywhere when I want to access as a test failover, I just need to use a remote desktop and use the public IP address for logging into it. Okay. When I do that, I get an access. That is where you can able to see that the failover test has been completed. Means the testing of your entire info, what you have set up, is running good or not, what exactly it is, right? And in our environment, when we were trying to do these recordings, even we tested with the Linux, right? Because Azure Site Recovery helps even to have your site recovery for a Windows virtual machines, Linux virtual machines, or VMware virtual machines, or it can be physical servers, or it can be virtual as well, right? This is how a simple steps we follow to ensure to have a site recovery as a disaster in our on-premises environment. So till now, what I have covered is basically Azure files, which can be a file servers, which can be used for your synchronizing on your cloud with the Azure benefit. Second is how do you ensure your backup has a provision for your recoveries when you have a threats or any other things, because the ransomwares are something which we have been easily, or we are hearing a lot of push happening in a lot of cyber threats. And the third one is the site recovery agent. Okay. With this, I would like to request my colleague and the subject matter expert who can help us to give us more walkthrough on a management easy from Azure with Azure Arc. Over to you, Ko. Ko, you there?
Thanks,
Thank
Amma.
you.
Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thanks so much for the great sharing, right, on demonstrating how we can leverage the Azure File Sync to synchronize file for the different offices and branches office around the different location, and how we can actually leverage the Azure Backup to provide the protection, right, for the files, for the folder that is being synchronized. And not limited to that, right, with the Azure Site Recovery, we can actually back up the virtual machine and also even the physical server as well, right? And speaking of the management capability, even from the Azure portal, right? Let's talk about the Azure Arc, right? The management that come from Azure, right? So basically, Azure Arc act as the central control plan, right, to security, right, via the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which continuously monitor the security posture, right, and it actually visualize, analyze, and respond to monitoring data and events via the Azure Monitor, right? Then in addition to that, Azure Arc audit the resources, right, using Azure policy, right, to making sure that all objects that is monitored is actually compliant to certain standard, right? And Azure Arc also gives us a powerful way to track changes, inventory, and even software updates and patches, right? Not limited to that, Azure Arc also comes with some preview features like Azure Resource Bridge, which allow us to self-provision the virtual machine onto the on-prem workload, and also the Azure Auto Manage to actually simplify the system onboarding for IT administrator, right? So let's move forward. Let me show you a demo recording on how IT Pro can actually leverage the Azure Arc to manage the environment, right? So in this demo, right, I'm going to show you how powerful Azure Arc is, right, to help us manage the Azure Stack HCI, for example, right? So here I got a Azure Stack HCI cluster called HCI, right? So I'm going to zoom in on node 1, right, of this cluster and show you what I can do with this node, right? So let's take a look on the Azure Security Center now has been rebranded as Microsoft Defender for Cloud, right? It shows the overall security posture of my monitor environment and a secure score that provide the recommendation for us to improve it, right? In addition to that, let's take a look on the policy menu, right? So it shows the compliance stage of my monitor environment, right? So I can click on the non-compliant resources to understand more about the compliant detail and recommendation on how to improve it to become compliant, right? So moving forward, right? So we take a look on log analytics, right? Right. This menu, we can actually enable log analytic feature to visualize, right, to analyze and respond to monitoring data and event, right? So from here, IT Pro can actually use the query command to actually filter the logs based on the requirement, right? So speaking of the performance data, right? So what I can also do is I can use the Azure Monitor to have an overview on resources utilization of my server, right? At the same time, right, I can also have better understanding for the utilization over the period, right? And in addition to that, I also get a dependency map to have an overview understanding of the incoming and outgoing traffic to and from my monitored server, right? So from here, I can actually drill down into a specific port, and in this particular port, what are the endpoints that the traffic actually are connected, right? So this is how we actually can actually manipulate using the heat map, right? So in addition to that, I also get change tracking capability on software, files, services, as well as registry, right? I also get a software inventory as well. So I can see there all the applications which are installed and also the Windows services status, right? So last but not least, right, I wanted to show you the update, the management update capability for ARC-enabled server, right? So obviously, I would like to making sure that all my server are always pages, right? In this case, I can actually see there's some new updates are available for my cluster node, so I can schedule the update and deploy the task. All right. So in addition to that, right, Azure Arc is also the platform that not only we can use it to actually manage the Windows platform, right? We can also use Azure Arc to actually monitor other platforms like Linux, right? Like for example, we can use it to monitor the Ubuntu Linux, the CentOS Linux, the SUSE Linux, and Red Hat Linux, and so on, right? So how exactly on how all these things work in Linux platform, right? So this is how it works, right? So in the Linux environment, right? So once we actually install the Azure Arc agent into the Linux machine, right? You see that this Linux machine actually showed as the Azure resources in Azure portal, right? So from here, we can see the status of the machine and also the version number of the machine, right? And also some tagging that specifically configured for this particular machine, right? Not limited to that, we can also view the activity log of this particular monitor machine, right? So that the IT pro can have a better understanding whether there's any changes or even there's any update made for this particular machine, right? So from here, the beauty is we can actually filter the time span, right, of this log activity into a certain period of time, right? So here, IT pro can actually have better understanding, right? So moving forward, we can also use the access control to actually maintain the permission who can actually manage this machine together with the tagging that required, right? So from here, we also have the Defender for Cloud to actually monitor and make sure the secure score of my monitored Linux machine and list out the recommendation on how I can actually improve it further, right? And of course, we can also manage the extension, like for example, the log analytic extension that for my virtual machine, for my Linux machine, that I can actually manage the event and the log that recorded in the virtual machine, right? And moving forward, of course, I can also use the Azure policy to actually monitor the compliance stage of my Linux machine. And even better, we can use the update management to actually manage the pages and the updates that is available for my Linux machine, right? So from here, the IT pro can actually use the Azure Arc, the single pane of glass platform that manage the Windows environment as well as the Linux environment, right? And of course, right, the inventory, right, and the change taking is also work for the Linux machine. Like from here, we can actually monitor the Linux daemon, right, which is the services that is currently running on the Linux machine, and the file or the config file that the IT Pro are going to monitor, right, as well as the changes that is made over a period of time is also capable for IT Pro to actually monitor what has been changed during within a certain period of time, right? So from here, we can also utilize the heat map in terms of security on understanding the connectivity that connecting from and for the Linux machine, right? So this capability is actually same as how the Azure are actually monitoring the Windows platform, right? And speaking of the performance data, right, I can use the resource utilization page to actually monitor the resources usage for my Linux machine, right? So this is how powerful it is, right? The platform can actually help us to actually manage not only the Windows machine as well as the Linux environment, right? So let's moving forward, right? Let's talk about the features that I actually mentioning just now. The one is called the Azure Resource Bridge, right? We're supporting the self-service servicing on management from where we can actually manage the virtual machine deployment directly from the Azure portal, right? So this is something that where I want to show you, right? Where we can actually deploy the virtual machine directly from the Azure portal, right? Where eventually the workloads, right, for this particular virtual machine is actually running on the HCI cluster that running on premise on the customer local data center, right? So for example here, right, this is how the screen that we actually provision the virtual machine, right? And with the resource group selection, right, the NAN for the virtual machine, right? For example, I'm creating a virtual machine called Ubuntu, right? And from here, right, you can see that I'm actually selecting a custom location called Kuching data center, right? And this is a data center where I actually set up on-premise, right? And from here, my IT administrator already preloaded certain images that for the users, like for example, for me to actually use to provision the virtual machine, right? And with some of the memory setting, like whether I want to static the memory setting or I would like to use the dynamic setting, right? And furthermore, this is the security setting for the root user, right? Because I'm actually installing a Linux machine, right? So this is the security key that I need to set in order for me to actually running a secure SSH connection to the virtual machine, right? And this is the network setting that are actually representing my on-prem environment, right? Because I'm running this on my Azure site HCI. And from here, I'm actually selecting the network switch that is configured in the local data center, right? So once everything is ready, right? So I get the screen to actually preview all the setting, right? And once it's ready, I will start to click on create, right, to provision the virtual machine. Right, so you see, this is how powerful it is, right? The IT Pro is actually using the Azure portal to actually provision the virtual machine, right? However, the virtual machine is actually running on-premise on the local data center, right? So it actually works as a management control plane, right, for IT Pro to actually have a secure remote way to actually manage the workload deployment, right? Not only from the management perspective, this is also from the deployment perspective. Right. So you see now the virtual machine is currently provisioned, right? So let's move forward and take a look on how the machine look like after the provision is been done. All right. So as you can see here now it's still running. Right. It takes a little bit of time. All right. So it's ready. Right. So from here we will actually go to the resources and take a look how does the workload actually deploy. Right. So from here, this is my Ubuntu Linux virtual machine that is deployed, right, using the Azure portal via this Azure resource rig, right? And from here, I can actually monitor and manage the resources like networking setting, the disk setting, the memory size, right? And also adding some property to my virtual machine, right? So you can see that all the management plan, the control plan is from Azure portal. But however, right, the actual virtual machine is actually running on the local data center on-premise, right? So this is the Azure Stack HCI that I'm running, and where I actually provision the virtual machine, like for example, this Ubuntu virtual machine that using the Azure portal, right? So this is the powerful tools that the IT administrator will like, where they can actually perform the deployment lifecycle of the virtual machine remotely using Azure portal, right? And this provides a very secure and reliable platform for the IT administrator to perform this action, this task, right? Because the IT Pro no longer require to run additional VPN connection or open certain ports in the local firewall in order to access these local resources to perform this virtual machine deployment task, right? So from here, you can see that I have connected to the virtual machine that is just now I actually provisioned from the Azure portal, right? And the workload is actually running on-premise locally in the local data center, right? So this is something that is really interesting that allow the IT Pro to perform the virtual machine self provisioning from the Azure portal, right? And in addition to that, right, I also wanted to talk about one of the really interesting capability that provided by Azure Arc called Azure Auto Manage, right? So it's a features that offer a unified solution to simplify the IT management, right? It automates the operation and apply consistent best practices across the entire life cycle of the Windows Server as well as the Linux server in Azure, or in the hybrid environment enabled by the Azure Arc. So let's take a look. Right, so this is how the Azure Auto Manage can actually help us. Right, it can actually help the IT pro to manage the machine best practices. Right, it can actually simplify the configuration profile, right, and manage the server here. Right, manage the monitoring capability here. Right, so from here you can see that I have different Arc enabled server. Right, so let me click on one of the server with the yellow sign. Right, you can see that because the server is not online, so you can see that there is a yellow color warning sign, right? So what about the other machine? Like for example, my SQL Server 2012, right? So you can see that it's already connected as Arc enabled machine and is currently online and is also managed by one of my auto managed profile, right? So you can see here with a profile, with an auto managed profile, I can actually customize different type of Azure Arc setting, right? Specifically for this group of server, right? So as long as a particular Arc enabled server onboarded to this particular profile, you actually pick up all the customized settings that are actually predefined, right? Like for example, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, right? I can see here the Defender for Cloud actually help me to run the assessment test in my SQL Server and actually list out all the area of improvement in terms of security, right? And in addition to that, you can also see that the Azure policy also help me to improve for my compliance, right? My compliance of this particular SQL Server, Windows Server 2012 R2 with SQL Server 2012 installed, right? So from here, you can see that it lists out a lot of non-compliant object, right? Rules, and how can I actually make it to be compliant, right? So this is something that really cool, right? So this is how the auto managed profile can help IT pro to actually simplify it, right? So even better, right? We can also have the machine configuration dashboard that actually view all the configuration. This is so-called the hardening rule, right? How we can actually improve the server configuration based on the Windows baseline that provided by Microsoft, right? So this is some kind of like a best practice that provided by Microsoft, and I actually run an assessment test on this virtual machine that onboarded into this profile, and from here I can actually review the security configuration setting, which can I actually improve further to hardening that machine, right? And of course, I can use the auto manage profile to actually onboard the machine as part of the update management portal, right? From here, I can actually manage the machine updates from the portal here, right? And send for the inventory and the change taking, right? I can actually manage the services and also the change taking in the machine that I'm currently monitored, right? And of course, speaking of the performance data, right, I can actually use the performance panel to actually manage the resource utilization for my virtual machine, right? So this is how we can actually utilize the Azure Auto Manage profile to actually simplify all the Arc management server deployment, right? Like for example, if you have tens of hundreds of Azure Arc enabled server, right? Instead of going into the individual server to enable those settings, for example, the Azure policy, the Defender for Cloud, or even the analytic log spares and so on, right? In order for system administrator to enable those features one by one, it's actually time consuming, right? And the auto manage profile actually provide a simplified and unified way to actually group all those settings into profile base, right? So for example, I can create a profile for my lab environment, right? I can create a profile for my production environment, right? And I can create a profile for my R&D environment. And all these three profiles are actually come with different customized art features and extension configured, right? So as long as the machine is actually onboarded to respective profile, they will actually pick up the setting that I configured, and the profile will actually help me to deploy those settings accordingly, right? So this is how powerful it is. The auto manage profile can actually help us to simplify the management capability for us, right? And this is also the screen that I want to show you how we actually create the configuration profile, right? So you can see here, existing, I have a development profile, I have an end of support profile, and production profile, right? So let's say I wanted to create a profile for my lab environment, right? I have lots of lab machine and lab server, right? So I want to onboard those server into this profile and with a customized setting, right? Like for example, I do not want backup for my lab environment, so I can actually deselect this setting, right? And I can actually check whether I would like to have a Microsoft anti-malware feature turned on, and whether I want to have the inside monitoring, right, the update management, and of course, I want to make sure that all my lab machine is updated with the latest security patches, right? So this is a setting that I would like to have. And okay, I would like to, I don't want all my lab machine to have the boot diagnostic enabled since once they boot up, so I can actually disable this option, right? And of course, I can also customize the setting by turn on the Windows Admin Center for my this are all the machine that actually onboarded into my lab profile, right? So once my profile is created, right, what I need to do is to onboard the machine to the profile, right? So from here, I will select my lab profile, right, the one I newly created just now, and select the art-enabled server that I would like to onboard into this particular profile, right? So simple, right? Create a profile with a customized setting, right? Onboard the server that you want to be applied with the settings that you configured, and once it's ready, right, you show that it's onboarded and it's connected, right, and it's done, right? The server will actually pick up all the art setting that is predefined within the profile and apply accordingly, right? So this is how powerful it is. The auto manage actually help IT pro, IT administrator to actually simplify and unify the art management environment. All right, so I think that's all for me, and I will pass it over to you, Amma. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, coach. It was very quick and simple. Yes, I understand.
Sure.
Everyone can use this different services from Azure to ensure
Yes,
they have
exactly.
the best of their environment more steady and helpful, right? So as a recap, right, so we covered almost all the topics which we have thought of to commit for today's session. So the best part, what we need to take away from this session, right? So Azure Files, as a recap, I'm just doing, right? It helps us to utilize the Azure as a centralized solution for managing our file services to be accessed from multiple locations. It's a simple, right? And it is as seamless as what we set up our file services on our on-premises. The same way, the next one comes is basically when it requires a disaster recovery capability, centralized one, which is Azure Backup. Okay, it helps us to have our applications consistency and manage the multiple workload supports, or it can be helpful for double storage options or any other steps of it. And plus the security, because Azure Backup actually has the protection from the ransomware and encryption and other all the capabilities with even a multi-factor authentication. On the third one, which is basically Azure Site Recovery. right? It ensures to help us as a simple disaster recovery solutions, and it can be managing a multiple workload support, and it will have a best of monitoring by using an admin center, Windows Admin Center, which is again a free tool with the Windows Server and Azure Stack HCI configuration, plus which you can able to manage it even from the Azure portal as well, right? These three are something which is very much simple to use and start with your planning for your customer requirements or for your environments for having a best of the disaster recovery and with the minimal investment kind of, okay? When it comes for the management of the holistic picture beyond just a disaster recovery, that's where Co helped us a lot of good real-time demos which you can able to see how you can able to implement on your edge the defender basically from the cloud with the latest against threats for the security, and how can a IT administrator or an organization can see the total infrastructure, number of devices, what's actually happening, and what is the status and the actions to be taken care of, and how the holistic company's approach can be creating a policy for the devices usage or the edge devices management, right? And this is how the scale it is like from on premises to connect in the cloud and taking the benefit from cloud towards infrastructure. This is basically a true hybrid capabilities which easily can be integrated. And especially one of the important point I want to say with the latest things what we have been seeing is the update managements, because with the complexity of a lot of services and the servers which is running on the infrastructure, we require a simplified, sophisticated and easy method of managing the updates for all the devices, all the servers into the infrastructure. That's where Azure update management comes into the picture, right? With this which I just wanted to emphasize, today we have completed our session, which is Azure hybrid capabilities with Azure Stack HCI. And there is one more exciting session which is coming up on May 22nd, which will be majorly focused on a multi-layer security from the Azure Stack HCI perspective, and how we can actually take the benefits of a security even from Azure. Okay. And I just wanted to leave an email ID where you can able to contact us. I can just place this slide for a few seconds if someone wants to take down the note of an email ID, or if you want some help for your POCs or the real-time situations where you want to utilize these kind of technologies for your testing purposes. If you want to have any technical discussions to be done, please reach out to us on this email ID, right? So we are available. And with this, I would like to thank from our core team what we all have been working for you all to help you all to make sure there's the new technologies or the services which can be helpful to easily integrate it in your organization. And before leaving, I would like to see you all for the next session, which is scheduling on 22nd for the security aspect on Azure Stack HCI and Windows Server. Would like to see you. Thank you all. Thank you for joining the session. Okay. There are a few WhatsApp groups what we run as a community, which you all can able to just join. This is a QR code. Just scan your cameras and you can be part of our groups. This is all WhatsApp groups where we emphasize and ensure to get a lot of more latest informations to be posted, so that all the IT people have an up-to-date what's happening in the perspective of a security, because that is very core important, especially post-COVID, right? This is how multiple things we do. Thank you everyone for joining the session. Hope you enjoyed it. Any queries, please just mail to us on the email ID, which we even shared on the chat window on the YouTube live. Thank you. Thanks everyone.